Well, good evening, good day, everybody. It's Wednesday, March 11th. It's 6 p.m. Moscow time here in Yalta in the Crimea. Um, the topic tonight is, well, Iran, the war on Iran, what's next? But I have to begin with this. I wonder if any of you, and there aren't a hell of a lot of you who watch my shows or watch the recordings on a variety of platforms, but I wonder how many of you are kind of feeling overwhelmed. I wonder if any of you are feeling pissed off. I wonder if you are angry about anything that's going on, not only with this war in Iran, but what's going on back in the United States, in the EU, and certainly what's going on in the Middle East. I'm feeling rather subdued tonight. I haven't done a show in about a week, and I just haven't wanted to be a part of the 24/7 endless cacophony, the noise from the mainstream media, from alternative media, from the social media, the blogosphere. It's been overwhelming, and I've tuned it out. I've been here in Russia for 6 years, and ever since I've been here, my focus has been to tell the truth about Russia and what's really going on in Russia and what's going on in the war in Ukraine. And then all kinds of people decided they were going to be bloggers, and they were going to comment on all things Russian, the war in Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I interviewed many of these people 5-6 years ago, and today they've really become what I would call rock stars. Their numbers continue to rise in terms of subscribers, in terms of viewers. They're in the stratosphere. 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 subscribers and viewers. I'm not in that stratosphere, and I never will be. But the question I always had was, what are all these guys going to do? And they're not just guys, but the majority are guys commenting on the war in Ukraine, on what's really going to happen to Russia. What are they going to do when the war in Ukraine is over? Well, you got the answer. The war in Ukraine isn't over. They now have the US-Israeli war on Iran. And what it looks like to me is a bunch of jackals, a bunch of sharks in a feeding frenzy. They used to do one show a day, one interview a day. Now they're doing 4 and 5 or more interviews a day. I don't know how many of you people can really take it. I don't know how many of you are following it. I happen to think that most of you who will watch my shows, probably are not too engaged in all of that. I have no idea. I'd like to hear from you. If you're listening, don't be afraid to put your comments in the online chat. So where am I going with this? I've come to the conclusion, and I really came to this conclusion a long time ago, that we're in an information war. But what is happening now with this U.S.-Israeli war on Iran is the information war on steroids. It has never been so ubiquitous. It's never been so overwhelming. It's 24/7. It doesn't stop. It's impossible to tell what is true, what is false. Are the fact checkers really ending up telling us what is true? Can you believe all of these rock stars? You don't have to mention the names. You all know who they are. Can you believe them? None of them are there in the Middle East. They're at home, sitting in their living rooms or sitting in their makeshift studios, commenting on what they think is happening and what's going on. There's the mainstream media. In terms of the mainstream media in the United States, it's all a matter of lies, or it's a matter of disinformation, or it's a matter of not reporting it at all. Israel has imposed the most draconian censorship I think we've ever seen. Penalty of up to 5 to 15 years in jail for posting any pictures or videos or information on Iranian strikes on Israel. You've got the mainstream media in Europe promulgating lies, disinformation. It's really overwhelming. And I really would like to know how any of you who will end up watching this live stream or will see it recorded later, I'd like to know what you think. Now, in terms of censorship, which is happening in Israel, it's happening in the United States, it's happening in the EU, it's also happening here in Russia. I woke up this morning, I booted up the computer as I always do. I opened my VPN. I have a Russian VPN. And right away, something was different. I used to be able to choose between, I don't know how many countries, from A to Z. And I could choose any country I wanted. I mostly selected Russia, Moscow, Novosibirsk, or there were 8 or 10 American VPN locations that I would use on occasion to be able to access applications, my bank in America. I woke up this morning and there were only 8. Among the 8 was Russia. I don't remember all of them. Great Britain, Germany, Australia, Russia, the USA, and I'm forgetting somebody. There were 8 of them. But the problem was I could no longer access many of my applications that I use to get my message out. For example, YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, X, all access blocked, inaccessible. I'm surprised that I'm broadcasting live right now with StreamYard, that it was not blocked. But if you're watching this on YouTube, on Facebook, I can't, or X, I can no longer access any of those platforms. So I have no idea where this video, this live stream is going to end up. But it is all part of what I started out by saying, the information war. Now, I've never forgotten this quote from William Casey, who was the CIA director under Ronald Reagan. And he said in 1981, we will know our program of disinformation has been successful when everything the American public believes is false. Now, many of you are aware that the CIA has been involved in these disinformation projects, programs, well, ever since their inception at the end of World War II. And they've perfected it to an incredibly high degree. And they're not alone because other countries are using it as they have to get their populations to believe that everything they're being fed is false. Now, my guest is not a guest, my friend, my colleague, my comrade, Eric Arnow, sitting up there in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Eric, you just heard this rant, a little over 10 minutes. I wonder what the heck your thoughts are sitting up there in this amazing, beautiful country, incredible tourist destination, Thailand. What are your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, first of all, Thailand is south of Russia, so I wouldn't call it up there in Chiang Mai. I'd call it down there. If there is an up and down in this world, from a cosmic point of view, there is no up and down. But anyway, I'm south of you, and it was a cold day today. It was about 25 degrees Celsius, or maybe 75, 80 degrees, something like that, Fahrenheit. But anyway, I've been writing about these issues for years. I wrote an article, I think maybe 3 years ago or so, called "The War on Consciousness: Manufacturing Stupidity." I wrote an article in 2015 following my trip to Crimea, because I knew that what we were being fed about the whole situation with the Maidan and the and what followed, it was basically a Obama, Biden, Victoria Nuland coup, using Nazis to take over a country and turn it into a dagger in the heart of Russia. I knew what was going on there. I wrote about that, and I called it, cutting through delusions. Because people have been propagandized to a terrible, terrible degree. When you have personal friends who are hanging out blue and yellow flags and sending charitable donations to the poor people of Ukraine, not realizing that the people who are receiving this money are gangsters and fraudsters, and these are intelligent people, it proves the point that what William Casey was saying. Now, I don't feel, because I don't know if it's my personality or what, but I think I try to remain objective about these things. And, we have an initial flash of anger, but I don't think that harboring anger and, holding on to that anger, the anger itself, you see, is it eats away at your nervous system. It actually decreases your immune system. So I don't think it's so healthy to just harbor anger. We need to redirect that anger towards something that is positive. That's my viewpoint on it. But I agree with you that we are in an information war. And I just did a recent article. Who do I start off the article with? A speech by Goebbels. And I compared Goebbels to Pete Hegseth, because both of them are talking about wars that they are losing, and to Goebbels' credit, he at least admitted that the Stalingrad, which was a major turning point in World War II, the Germans lost. But here we are in Iran, and it's not at all clear who is going to win this war, because Iran is getting decimated, but the United States is hurting too, and Israel is getting hurt. And it's hard to say who's going to survive all this, if anybody, because it could, because the personalities involved are so psychopathic. There was one, somebody asked Trump some question. I think it was what the course of the war is. He stated 5 lies within less than a minute. They were lies, and he gets away with it. He's very adept at lying to people. He's had a lifetime of experience lying to people. That's what real estate agents do for a living. They sell you a mansion where it's actually a swamp. So Trump is very good at this, and as you say, the whole media landscape in the United States is based on lies. Even in Germany, there was a book that was written by a guy who was in the pocket of the CIA for years. He wrote a book called Verkaufte Journalisten, which means bought journalists. They were paid by the CIA to post stories that were flatly false and present them as objective journalism. This has been going on for a long, long time. Now, the problem is that we were able to maintain a facade of democracy by presenting journalism as an expression of democracy, but as the facade of imperialism has fallen, and the case of the Ukrainian war, which we were told, a bunch of lies about that, and Russia, even though it is not, rolled into Kiev yet, it hasn't gone the way that the United States expected it to. And likewise, in the case of Iran, the United States, Trump said it's going to be a fast war, and this is called blitzkrieg, that he's repurposing blitzkrieg to become a lightning war where it'll all happen very fast. So there are parallels between this kind of totalitarian mindset that we've seen in the past, and it's become more and more evident and necessary as they lose control of the narrative. So as they lose control of the narrative, they have to lie more in order to convince people to go along with it. But that's not working for them. So then they have to pull out the censorship card. So what we're seeing here is a descent into a fake democracy, into outright totalitarianism, which is a really scary proposition. You add onto that the fact that financial markets are based on trust. And as the trust level goes down, that creates greater volatility in the financial markets. So they're flirting with a complete meltdown of the entire system, because you can't, lies work for a while, but in the long run, reality is the only solution. And eventually it's going to come to the stark reality is going to hit. And when it hits, it's not going to be fun.
There's a number of things that we can follow up on. We've got a couple of comments in the live stream, and I really appreciate that. I wish more people would jump in. One of the comments, I'll put it here on the screen. I don't know who this person is, but Brett T, LAMO, laughs my butt off. The strait isn't closed. They have ships escorting the oil tankers. Y'all are fear-mongering. Well, we haven't talked at all about any of what's going on in the Middle East, certainly not the straits that are closed. So this is what I have wanted to avoid. Eric, you and I haven't wanted to jump on that feeding frenzy, trying to speculate about what's really happening over there. We haven't even talked about that tonight. I mean, the only thing we've alluded to is that there's a war going on there. You've talked about Trump, and the thing that I wanted to follow up about Trump that's so different than any previous president, he has not even made an attempt to justify this unprovoked aggression on Iran. There's no denying that. He hasn't even tried. In fact, he's just relied on his own gut instinct that is telling him that this is what he's got to do because these religious tyrants and these sponsors of terrorism, this is not my words, these are his words, need to be done away with. The United States has been at this for like 40 years. So I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into jumping into that feeding frenzy about what is really happening over there. You mentioned the economic fallout for this. I want to stay away from the Straits of Hormuz. I think everybody's talking about that. But Eric, what you and I have been talking about, certainly I've been talking about for several years now, is the economic situation in the United States. It's not sustainable. A $38 plus trillion national debt, $18 trillion personal household debt that includes student loans. Inflation is on the rise. Prices for everything. My friends in America are telling me the cost for gas is doubled in some places. Somebody showed me a picture of gas in California is $8 a gallon.
No.
People are telling me they went to the supermarket and, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they could buy a piece of steak for like $3 or $4. And now it was like $25 or $30 for a piece of steak. Everything from toilet paper to toothpaste has increased in cost. You can call it what you want, inflation or prices are rising, joblessness in the United States. The government, in my opinion, has been flat out lying about this. They always have. The United States is not producing anything that people can consume. It's all been offshored. What is the United States doing? It's the service industry, technology, Silicon Valley, the AI bubble, which is giving a false indication of what the stock market is really all about. But I have been maintaining, Eric, for a long time, that kind of domestic policy is just not sustainable. When I left 6 years ago, almost to the week, Eric, is when I left the United States to come to Russia. I was paying $600 a month for an apartment. That was a government subsidized apartment. I'm not ashamed to say that. In Augusta, Maine.
In the United States?
In Augusta, Maine. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were going to raise it another couple $100 a month, which I'm going, wait a minute. That's going to be almost half of what my small Social Security pension is. Without a car in the state of Maine, you are basically grounded. There isn't any public transportation. There are no buses. There are no trains. My car, an incredible Subaru, had rusted out because of the winters and the salt they put on the roads. And I couldn't get it certified. And so it didn't pass inspection. I couldn't afford another one, even another $2,000 clunker, I couldn't afford. And, every time I went to the gas station, that was taking more money out of my pocket. I was living as frugally as I possibly could. And I came to the conclusion that I couldn't afford to live there anymore. Eric, how many millions of other Americans we're in that situation or worse. We got millions of people that are homeless. We got the middle class that is basically evaporated. Eric, I know people who've graduated from college with master's degrees. This is a fact. I can't mention the names. They are working in telephone kiosks, selling smartphones, SIM cards, and various accessories. I know somebody with a PhD who was driving a taxi in New York City. Now, I'm not even talking about what possible impacts this war in Iran could have on not only the US economy, but the entire Western economy. I'm just talking about what's been going on in the United States. It's not sustainable. Donald Trump came in and he said he was going to close the border. Millions of people said, "Whoa, I'll vote for him for that." He said, "I'm going to peace president." Millions of people said, "Wow, no more foreign wars. He's going to end the war in Ukraine on day one." And the implication was, we'll be friends with Russia. This will be over. None of it happened. Everything has been turned 180 degrees. Now, Eric, I really don't want to get into speculating about what kind of economic impact the war in Iran is going to have on the United States or the rest of the world. This is a global war, whether people want to admit it or not, because everything, the way I look at in the world now, we are a globalist civilization. All of the supply chains are interconnected. Doesn't matter for what. For food, for grain, for oil, for minerals, for fertilizer, for rare earth minerals. It doesn't matter what it is. Everything is connected. It's an incredible system. But Eric, this could have, and I think it already is beginning to have, tremendous negative impact on countries around the world. And I'm not even going to get into, I don't know if you want to go there, but the impact of this war of aggression, unprovoked, by the United States on the country of Iran is going to have enormous economic impacts. And Eric, I don't see a lot of conversation about that in the blogosphere. Everything is on who's winning, how many missiles, how many drones, what has happened in Iran, how many people have been killed, how many villages blown up, how many girls' schools have been hit, how many girls were killed in that first attack. I mean, this is what this beehive has been all about. But as I said, Eric, I really didn't want to go there. I want to try to look at it from a bird's eye view about what's happening in terms of the information that's being fed to the entire planet. You take it from there.
Well, the whole tenor of my my discussions has been, instead of looking at the granular point of view, which is what you've just described and which many of the so-called experts talk about, I don't look at it that way. I look at it from you could say, a bird's eye point of view. We talk about the Ukraine war, we talk about the Iran war, we talk about Gaza, but these are all symptoms of a much bigger. It's a global war. This is a war that is going on between complete world systems of thought. For thousands of years, China was basically the major country, with India being close behind. We have to remember that some of the greatest philosophical thinking of civilization came from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita in India, which was what 2,000-3,000 or more years old. And in China, you had Taoism and Confucianism. You had Buddhism, of course, and the modern Western philosophical thinking really started, you could say, with the Greek philosophers and the Romans. But Asian civilization has been far older and far better and far more entrenched. It was only during the let's say from the 1500s on that due to technological superiority that the Europeans had, that they were able to basically commit genocide against the rest of the world and take over the world in terms of hegemony. But what we're seeing is a dramatic shift back, because the way that Western civilization works, it is always it's self-defeating. Taoism talks about this. When you're constantly involved with wars, that you're actually fighting yourself. You exhaust yourself by constantly feeding hatred and destruction and things of that nature. The Oriental civilizations, yes, of course they had wars, but they weren't on the same scale as what the Europeans have been doing, especially in the last 500 to even 1,000 years. So what I'm saying is that this kind of parasitic cultural quality of the mentality of the people in the West is self-defeating, and as a result, and because of the rise of Eastern civilizations, since World War II, they're losing control, and as they lose control, they become more desperate. So you have this kind of cancerous, mentality of the West coming up against a far more mature way of looking at the world that you see from the East. That is the real global conflict that is going on now, and it manifests in different flashpoints, like Ukraine, like Gaza, like Iran, like Venezuela. These are all symptoms of a much bigger global war that's going on. And the real question is are there enough adults in the room to handle the psychopaths that are running things in the West? That's the question.
It doesn't look like it. When you talk about war, and wars have been part of the human experience since the first cavemen were throwing rocks at each other and beating each other with clubs. The only thing that's happened is that with every generation or every epoch, every new discovery, the weapons got more and more lethal, to the point where we are today, where everything has changed. The development of the atomic nuclear weapons by the United States and their use in Hiroshima and Nagasaki has changed life on the planet forever. We now, as humans, have the capability of destroying all life on the planet.
To me, Regis, the question is the people who are running. You talk about Netanyahu and you talk about Trump, both of whom are serial warmongers. But it may be that they are defeating themselves. So we can't be sure of the it's not guaranteed that things are going to end up bad. And also we have to recognize the fact that countries like I would say China and to some degree and Russia also, these are much more mature countries, much more mature psychologically speaking than Western countries. So yeah, now there is censorship in Russia, there is censorship in China, but the censorship that they have is defensive censorship. The censorship that goes on in the United States is offensive censorship, because they don't want to talk about the lies. Russia and China are protecting their population from those lies. And I just did a study where many young Russians hate Russia. Why do they hate Russia? Because after the Soviet Union fell, the education system was redesigned to be non-ideological. But what does non-ideological mean? It means that the curriculum was rewritten by Western sources, like the Atlantic Council. Who funds the Atlantic Council? The CIA, the State Department, the Foreign Office of the British. And so they filled these young people's brains up with black propaganda. And so Russia is fighting back against that. So there's two kinds of censorship. There's protective censorship and this offensive censorship. So I think I should just include that in this. It is an information war, but we have to consider being defensive in some ways against this kind of black propaganda, which just spews out of the Western media landscape.
Well, you made a really good point, and I agree with you. Where I'm frustrated that I've just been blocked on a number of applications that have been very important for me to get my message out, which is a pro-Russian message. It's an anti-U.S. propaganda and lies message. But the difference, Eric, you mentioned is defensive, but it's the same existential threat that's happening to Iran. Russia is fighting for its very survival. And Joseph Biden made that clear when he was president. The strategic foreign policy goal of the United States and the West is to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, decapitate the leadership, namely Putin, and to steal its resources. That's been the West's goal for 500, 600, 700 years. And so when you look at it from that point of view, in trying to preserve its sovereignty, fighting for its very future, its very existence, I see no problem with what you referred to as defensive censorship. And it's really sad that a lot of younger people, not only in Russia, but in the former republics and even in Europe, are believing the lies. Now, when you talk about lies, Eric, and you talk about war, you and I are pretty much in the same decade, I think. I just turned 81. And the United States has been at war against someone every single year of my life. And depending on who you listen to, in those 81 years, the United States has killed between 20 and 30 some million innocent civilians in victim countries. Now,
that doesn't count refugees. It doesn't count the immiseration of whole societies. There's a guy named Gideon Polya who talks about it's not just the combat deaths, it's the unnecessary deaths that occur because the society, the living standards fall so dramatically that more people die. So it's way more than 20 or 30 million.
Yeah, really good point. And when people in the United States are all up in arms over immigration, the immigration initially came from Central and South America. All countries the United States had decimated, all countries that the United States had installed brutal dictators, all countries that had favored American companies, whether they be American fruit companies, whether they became mining companies in Peru or Venezuela or Ecuador. It didn't matter. The United States created all of those people who fled. And where did they flee? Where did they flee to? They fled north to the United States. And these people were not criminals. They didn't come out of prisons and insane asylums. They were people who were seeking a better life. And Eric, where did they find it? They find it in California. They found it in Arizona. They found it in Florida, in the fields, raising and caring for the food and harvesting the food that America needed to live on. I lived in Arizona for 34 years. They were the people who in the summer, the 110 to 115 degree heat, who were roofing your homes. They were the ones who were gardening for you and for the cities and the municipalities. They were the ones on the golf courses, caring for the greens and the traps and the watering. They were the ones doing all the jobs that Americans did not want to do. Now, Eric, I had an awakening. I grew up a patriotic American. In 1945, I was born. I'm not considered a boomer, but I consider myself a boomer. They say boomers started in 1946. But I grew up in that period, okay? When American economy was booming. My father came back from the war. He had the GI Bill. He was able to build a house. We had a car. My mother didn't have to work. And we had a white picket fence around our house. It was the American dream. It was the American dream. And I had no reason to disbelieve that through most of my entire life. Although I disagreed with the first war in Iraq, the second war in Iraq, I was anti-war. I was against the Vietnam War, but I was trying to earn a living. I was trying to earn a family. And Eric, I've said this many times, my undergraduate degree was in United States history. Talk about a sanitized version of American history. It wasn't until 2012 when I had the opportunity to go to Jeju Island in South Korea. This peace group in San Francisco paid for most of that trip, and many other people helped support me going there. My mission was to just make a short documentary about a protest that had been ongoing for 7 years, 24/7, against the construction of a naval base to support Obama's pivot to Asia in this tiny village in South Korea. Well, I went there, and it turned out that what I learned and what I discovered was a massacre that occurred on this island of peasants, unarmed, who rose up against the American occupation after World War II, 1946 and 1947, before the Korean War. And when I learned about that, I realized that my country had been lying to me for my entire life. And that began...
I have to ask you a question. Didn't you know what was going on in Vietnam and in Iraq? I mean, the 2003 war in Iraq was based on provable lies. It was obvious, to me, it was obvious that those were lies that were going on. And Bill Clinton was bombing Iraq all during the 1990s. And Hans von Spanak of the UN was resigning because of the inhuman treatment that the Iraqi people were receiving. Weren't you aware of any of that?
Yeah, but as I said, I was preoccupied like most Americans, trying to raise a family, trying to support myself. And I was against it, but I wasn't out in the streets. I didn't have what I thought were the freedom to do that. And I only became radicalized when I went to Jeju Island in 2012. I became angry at what my country had done there, but in what my country had been doing forever. And where I wanted to go with this, Eric, is from that point on, I began my own personal in-depth study of American history dating back to the time that the white European colonialists came to the United States in 1492. And
Mm-hmm.
what the United States has become is what these white European colonialists did there, what they've been doing for 500 years around the world in India and China. The Philip didn't matter. Wherever they went and colonized, they killed indigenous people by the millions. They raped and stole resources and labor. And I started tracking that from 1492 all the way through to the present day. This is in American DNA. It was inherited, in my opinion, from the white colonial Europeans. The Americans just became the uber colonialists on steroids. And I realized then that everything I had been told about my country was a lie. Everything. It took a lot of years, but that was my awakening. Your awakening happened when you were a young man and you went into a Buddhist monastery and you followed your own inner journey of seeking the truth in a way that others haven't. But what I'm really talking about is coming to an understanding of what the United States really is and is all about. And hardly anybody is talking about that today, Eric. The United States, what it's doing today against Russia, it hasn't stopped. What it's doing against Iran and what it is doing against China and will continue to do against China as soon as it can maybe wash its hands of some of these other conflicts it's got itself embroiled in. And so, Eric, this is where I wanted to go today. I didn't want to get involved in the beehive, in the feeding frenzy about who's winning and what's going on in Iran. I wanted to get into the stories, the lies, the propaganda, the misinformation, which has been carefully crafted for decades and longer. And this is the message I think that people need to hear. People need to hear what's really going on. And people need to hear that the consequences of this have really come to a head today. I think people today are beginning to wake up. Many people are fearful. Eric, the conversation has been about nuclear war, well, for the last 8 to 10 years in the Ukraine war. Could this end up becoming a nuclear war between the United States and Russia? I made another film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, about that. But today, people are actually talking about, will Israel, known to have nuclear weapons, use those nuclear weapons in this conflict?
Mm-hmm.
There's a feeding frenzy about this today. But Eric, they're gaslighting everybody with this fear of Armageddon. The Christian Zionists are praying and hoping that this is the end of the world, when the Messiah is going to return and they will all be taken up to heaven. It's absolute, to me, insanity, but it's based on fear. Your final thoughts.
Yeah,
you can respond.
Yeah, I just saw an article today, and I want to write about it. Want to write about this article. It was talking about the fact that we have three fanatical factions of religion that are all talking about Armageddon in one form or another. You have the Jewish crazies who think that Jerusalem should be reestablished, and the Jewish temple, and God gave them the land of Israel. This is a joke. These are the ultra Orthodox people who think that Israel was given to the Jews by God. But then you have those secular Jews in Israel who don't believe in God, but they think that God gave Israel to them anyway. So you try and wrap your head around that. Then you have the Christian dispensationalists who have an apocalyptic view of humanity, and this is this kind of I call it this suicidal culture that people have. And then you have I was just reading that even within Islam, there's an idea that there's going to be a return of the imam, and he's going to solve all our problems for us. So you have these. There's a saying in it was a famous Tibetan teacher named Naropa, and he said, "When two fools meet, trouble is sure to result." Well, now we've got three fools meeting, these three crazy religious ideas that are clashing with each other all around this one particular area. Plus, you've got the crazy secular imperialists who are genocidal maniacs as well. So now we have four factions of crazy people who are bent on death and destruction. And you wonder, are there any sane people out there who are recognizing this as an issue? Well, obviously, there are sane people because they are raising these issues. But it's a serious problem. This one person, it was a rejoinder. They said, "Well, the evangelical Christians in the United States, they only make up 15 to 20% of the population, so they're not a major factor." Oh, really? They're driving Trump's foreign policy. Look at his Secretary of War. He's one of these crazy people. So he's still fighting the Crusades. He's got crusade things on his body. These people are out of their minds, and yet here they are in positions of power with presumably fingers on the button. So yeah, we should be concerned about it. How to deal with it. That's the starting point is awareness. You have to say to people, this is what is happening. But the problem, Regis, is that people are they're still in serious denial. They haven't been able to accept the enormity of the crimes of Western culture. I've done studies where during the 1960s, there were many, many protest songs. There's one song by this guy named Richard Faria, and he wrote The Bold Marauder. He says, "Hi-ho, hey, I am the bold marauder. Hi-ho, hey, I am the white destroyer." He died in a mysterious motorcycle accident. Then you had Steppenwolf writing this song called Monster. He talked about these people who came from Europe and seeking a new life, and then they destroyed everything. And this is in the 1960s during the Vietnam War, and he's saying, "America, where are you now? We can't fight alone against the monster." So you had that consciousness that was taking place in the 1960s, which was a serious challenge to this, murderous domination of the elites. But they were successful, and they successfully suppressed it, and funneled people into careerism and paying attention to your job and looking for your white picket fence house and so on and so forth. So people have not paid adequate attention, and as a result, this cancer at the core of Western consciousness has grown and grown and grown to the point where where we are at now. And this is third or fourth stage cancer. And are we going to be able to deal with that? Well, it remains to be seen.
Well, I want to encourage everybody to do two things. One, Eric, I've got scrolling across the bottom of the screen your Substack account where people can find you. It's very unique insights into daily living, into meditation, into topics that nobody else is talking about. And it's ericarnow.substack.com. The other thing that I would like to leave with whoever is listening, watching, or who will watch this, take a step back. Don't get caught up in the feeding frenzy in social media, in the blogosphere. Turn it off. We're going to find out in a few days, maybe a few weeks, how this is all going to shake out. There's not much that any of us can do to change anything. And so I think what I'd like people to do is to step back, find something to do outside, find something else to do with your time rather than just sitting in front of your computer or your television set, absorbing this overwhelming amount of information, disinformation, lies, and propaganda. We started out talking about the information war. Eric, I want to thank you again. It's always a pleasure. It's always very enlightening to have these conversations with you about things that most other people are not dealing with. So thank you for being with me again tonight. I want to thank everybody who's been listening. There's somebody made a comment. Eric is great, lots of knowledge and information. I appreciate you both taking the time from your days. We appreciate that. And Eric, buckle up because we're in for a really interesting ride.